Hello again, guys. Welcome back to the channel. This is Comic Kid here again, and today we have another Run versus Run segment. Now, I know it's been a while since I've done one of these, and the reason is I really just kind of wanted to figure out which storylines I wanted to do above others, and I also decided that I wanted to focus on some more complete storylines. And so I had the thought of comparing Kelly Sue DeConnick with Dan Abnett's Rebirth run on Aquaman, but then I thought it might be a good idea to do Geoff John's at the start of the New 52 versus Dan Abnett at the start of Rebirth. And so that'll be the video we have for you guys today. And before we get started, I did want to take a quick moment to thank you guys for subscribing to my channel. Recently, I just passed 100 subscribers, and I cannot tell you guys how much I appreciate it. Channel's grown so much in just over a year or so, and I started this channel just because I have a passion for these characters and figures and all that, and so it really means a lot that some of y'all share the same passions and value what I have to say, and so thank you guys. Really appreciate it. But to go ahead and get started, just some quick background on the two before we actually start comparing them. Geoff John started Aquaman in the New 52 run when it relaunched the DC Universe in 2011, and he wrote up to 4 volumes of it. Technically there is a spin-off with Aquaman and the Others that will not be factored into this just because Volume 2 alone focuses so much on the Others as well. But the only book I don't have pictured here is Book 4, which is Death of the King. Now, Dan Abnett actually started his run on Aquaman during the New 52, kind of at the tail end of it, but he only got one arc in before DC transitioned over to Rebirth. So technically it starts during the New 52 era, but for today's comparison, we'll be focusing strictly on the Rebirth stuff. Now, I don't have the first issue of his Rebirth run pictured here, but I really wanted to highlight Stefan Sejic's art just because I think it's phenomenal, and so you'll see some of his covers here as well. But Abnett recently left the title 2 or so years ago, and Kelly Sue DeConnick has been writing it ever since. And recently DC did just announce that her run on the title would be concluding. Now, to get into some more specifics, the biggest strength of Geoff John's run was that he did make Aquaman, like, cool again. And I kind of hate to say that, but before the New 52, Aquaman was always kind of viewed as a joke. A lot of people had absolutely no respect for the character, even though fans knew that he was still awesome and easily one of the best heroes in the DC Universe. Unfortunately, the general public perception of Aquaman was extremely poor at the time. So, Geoff Johns does kind of poke fun at Aquaman at the same time at several points throughout his run, but he definitely does a good job of making the character relevant in a modern setting. In fact, Johns did so much good for the character that a lot of what you see in the Aquaman movie is pulled straight from his run, especially in regards to Throne of Atlantis. Now, with that said, I don't think Johns has written some of the strongest Aquaman stories around. Throne of Atlantis is easily like the peak of his run, but for the little things he did for the character here and there, he definitely deserves the credit for reshaping and updating the character, especially for today's audiences. Starting with Volume 1, which is The Trench, Johns introduced all new villains, which are known as the Trench, but those are characters and creatures that did come from Geoff Johns' run. He didn't do terribly much to Black Manta. He did do a lot to kind of clarify his relationship with Aquaman, and he gave them like a much more streamlined and easy to follow relationship, especially in comparison to what it's been in the past. But for the most part, he left Black Manta pretty unchanged, especially personality-wise. Again, modern update, there are still a few notable differences between this Black Manta and the one pre-52, but fans of the character before were still likely to be fans of the character at this point. Now, he did kind of the same thing with Orm. Over the years, Orm has had several different interpretations, especially in his relationship to Aquaman. In this one, Geoff officially makes them half-brothers, and Orm is officially more so of a villain, or I guess you could still say he's an anti-hero. Before this, Orm was sometimes a straight-up villain, sometimes a straight-up ally to Aquaman. It really just kind of depended on who was writing. And then in Volume 4, he introduces another newer villain. In my opinion, that villain was the weakest of the 4 that Johns kind of works with in this run. And I was a little sad to see his run end on such a low note, especially in comparison to the highs in the first 3 volumes. That's not to say that I thought his run concluded poorly. I just thought that the first 3 volumes were significantly stronger than the 4th one. Villains aside, Johns also did a lot with Mera. Aquaman has always kind of had a complicated relationship with her in the past, whether he's married to her or not, and Johns did kind of up that in this case by making her a Zebel assassin sent to kill him for the sake of Zebel reclaiming their role in Atlantis. That's one of the bigger changes that the movie makes, is that Mera, despite her differences with Atlantis, is still kind of a good guy. And you don't ever see her as a villain in John's run, but they do tell you that she was always sent to kill him in the first place and ended up falling in love with him. Now, aside from the changes Johns made to Mera, I wouldn't say he necessarily improved upon her character. In my opinion, Abnett did a much better job of handling Mera than Johns did, but we'll get to that in a moment. Johns did also introduce this group called the Others. They had a 2-volume series, but unfortunately, while they were intriguing and served a good purpose in Volume 2 of Aquaman, there's also kind of a reason you don't see them around anymore. Some of the characters were intriguing, but they weren't necessarily strong enough to really stand on their own and hold their own title. So if you've never heard of the Others, unfortunately, I hate to say it, you're really not missing a whole lot, but that doesn't mean that Book 2 is bad by any means just because they're in it. It's just that they had a good idea and it didn't really go anywhere from that point. Now, that is just kind of a broad overlay of everything Johns did in the run, and I mentioned some of the stronger and weaker points of it in my opinion, but I did want to take a moment to talk about things that I specifically liked and disliked. In regards to the overall story, I do feel as though Johns plays it very safe. It's just kind of a classic tale of this hero who doesn't want to be king but kind of has to be, and all that for the greater good. It's very simple, and I agree that it's probably what Aquaman needed at the time, especially to win general audiences over. And for all the new elements he introduced to the character, I just wish there was a bit more to the overall story. Johns was also writing Green Lantern and Justice League at this time as well. Volume 3, Throne of Atlantis, does cross over with Justice League, and you see a lot of those characters come in as well. And I do think as though Aquaman's relationship with them in Throne of Atlantis could have been portrayed a little bit better. There's especially a part where Aquaman is essentially being told off by Batman, and in my opinion, the League would have had more respect for him at that point in time than to just ignore him and his wishes. That's really the only thing I kind of disagreed with. Now, easily one of the strengths of John's run is that he showed off exactly how powerful Aquaman can be. This character in his run totally commands respect. Any doubt that you had that Aquaman is lame and whatnot just kind of gets thrown out the window. And so I really appreciate that, not only did he make Aquaman cool, but he did it in a way that everyone kind of understands, yes, he's cool. And then I did kind of already mention, but the villains in his run were easily some of the strongest points in the series as well. Again, I wish the villain in the 4th arc were a little bit stronger, but there is that. And then really the only other complaint that I had was I felt the pacing was a little off at times. The first arc is technically only 3 or 4 issues long, and then the rest of book 1 is filled with just side story stuff. And you get that with comics all the time, and I guess for as much praise as book 1 of Aquaman got, I felt like I had read stronger Aquaman stories that had come before it. Now, aside from a few hiccups as far as the overall story goes, there's really no denying that Johns really has a solid run of Aquaman on his hands here. I think it was exactly what the character needed at the time. I would definitely consider it to be essential reading, at least the first 3. And so if you guys can come across it, I do recommend it. I would say that there are arguably stronger single stories out there, especially like Sub Diego, for example. But if you liked the movie and are interested in Aquaman, then yeah, the New 52 version is a great place to start with him. It'll tell you everything that you kind of already know if you've seen the movie, just in a bit more detail. But at the same time, there's also a reason the movie chose to adapt so much of these 3 stories in particular, and that's because they are really solid. And now, the last thing I wanted to touch on with Geoff John's run is the art. For the most part, he worked with Ivan Rice throughout the whole thing. Book 4 does have a different artist, and while I do think Ivan Rice, or Reese, is the stronger of the two, the art is not at all bad in Book 4 by any means. That is something that Abnett did differently. He worked with a bunch of different artists on his run. And so the good news is, if you like Ivan Rice's art, then good for you, but if you don't, then unfortunately you're kind of stuck with it for the whole series. That said, I think it's really hard to dislike Ivan's art. Like, I personally think it's gorgeous. Now, to transition into Dan Abnett's run. Abnett officially started, like I said, in the New 52, but we'll only be considering the stuff he did during the Rebirth era for this video. And he does a really good job of building off of what John's established. For the most part, he does kind of ignore everything that came between himself and John's. Jeff Parker and I believe Cullen Bunn both had a few arcs kind of after John's left. Abnett kind of skips over those when he starts the Rebirth run. But essentially the story of his is that Atlantis is kind of entering the world stage. They're really kind of trying to solidify their place as one of the big nations of the world, and they're trying to normalize relationships with the surface world and humans and all that. And of course that obviously leads to a bunch of like conflict, both in the sense that it's conflict of interest and like physical conflict, and so yeah. But it is safe to say that Abnett's run is very like political, not in the sense that it reflects like issues or problems with today's society, but it's more in the literal political sense, in that Aquaman is trying to work with these other nations from a literal political standpoint. And I have heard some people criticize his run simply because of all the politics and whatnot. I honestly thought it was a bit more of an interesting way to go. John's run always kind of focused on Aquaman as he grows and comes to accept the throne. Abnett's run focuses more so on what he does with the throne once he's actually king, at least at first. Now, the other thing Abnett does is he does kind of mirror a lot of the arcs that John's did. He doesn't exactly rehash anything except for arguably Throne of Atlantis. Now, I will say, I've already kind of said this, but Abnett really did a great job when it comes to Mira. While John's, I guess, did a lot to make her character a bit more intriguing, Abnett really makes Mira relevant to not only Aquaman, but in general the overall DC universe. It isn't really until the Rebirth run where you really see exactly how powerful Mira can also be, and she's just a much more intriguing character, in my opinion, than most people give her credit for. That said, I wouldn't say anyone really thought she was lame, but she just really stands out throughout all of Abnett's run. At least in comparison to Geoff John's. Now, I will say, Abnett did write the title beyond issue 38, but his run technically concludes at 38 as well. Once you get into 39 and up with him, It's a lot of crossover stuff. There was an arc with the Suicide Squad called Sink Atlantis, and it's a good story. You can tell that Abnett had a hand in writing it, but that story in particular was also designed to set up the Drowned Earth storyline, which was more of a Justice League story than an Aquaman one anyways. Abnett's run officially concludes in the Aquaman/Justice League Drowned Earth special, and then after that it transitions to Kelly Sue DeConnick, but it doesn't quite feel like it's all Abnett's story. So while there is a bit more to Abnett's run after issue 38, there's also not much else that just he wrote. To go into what I disliked about Abnett's run was it did kind of go up and down in quality. Again, I feel like, I guess, everything after issue 38 is kind of a weaker arc, and I do wish he had more of a chance to actually conclude his run, but oh well. But I did feel as though the third arc, which isn't really much of an arc, it just is kind of filler to transition between the first two arcs and then everything that comes after. But in my opinion, you can probably skip volume 3 entirely. There's really one issue in there that kind of sets up book 4, which is really good. But if you can find just that one issue, I'd recommend skipping book 3 entirely. Likewise, I think taking Mira away from Aquaman in the back half of the run was a good choice. The miniseries that's pictured here was absolutely excellent, and especially given what they do with Mira following Abnett's departure from the series, it totally makes sense given what he established with her during his run. And then lastly, in regards to Abnett, as I mentioned earlier, he did work with several different artists. Generally, I liked the art all the way through, but I would say that Stefan Sajic is easily the peak art style throughout the entire run. He only did one arc of interiors, and then he did a lot of covers after the fact, but Sajic's art just is absolutely gorgeous, and I'm really sad that he's actually no longer working with DC, because especially all the underwater stuff he does, it's so gorgeous. The art alone is enough to buy book 4, in my opinion. It's so good. And then before and after Sajic as well, the art's it is actually still really good. You do still get a lot of really cool scenes. I just feel as though Sajic is the strongest point in the art in Abnett's whole run. Now, as far as which one I prefer, I do think they both have their really high and really low points. Overall, I would say that I prefer Abnett's run, I guess. But with that in mind, I think Abnett's run only did so well for me because of what Geoff Johns did. And I think without everything Johns did in the New 52, Abnett's Rebirth run would be significantly weaker. So I do think the quality of his run does owe a little bit to what Geoff Johns did. That said, I think both of them are absolutely phenomenal. A lot of you guys are probably going to prefer what Geoff Johns did, but personally for me, I thought Abnett had the much better pacing, and that made for much stronger overall stories. And so I think in taking the highest points of Geoff Johns' run, he really was able to craft something truly solid. That said, there's no denying all the groundbreaking stuff that Johns did with Aquaman. I just felt as though Abnett had the stronger overall story. But that's about everything we have for you guys today. Let me know what y'all think down in the comments below. Let me know also what other runs you'd like to see featured on the channel. And thank you again for the 100 subscribers. Let's see if we can keep it going. But that's it for today, guys. Thank y'all so much for watching. Please feel free to click like and subscribe, and I will see you guys again next week.